Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we're taking a look at the Vrijheid. This is the new Tier 8 Dutch light cruiser, and the first thing you're going to notice is just the lack of range on these airstrikes. We only get 9.5 kilometers of range. One of my main complaints, of course, about the Utrecht and the rest of the tech tree ships was that they have such massive range to go along with the reload and damage. This one is more limited. But you'll also know it's much more extreme on the reload. 25.8 second reload. We also have a few other nice characteristics. We got a smoke screen as well as a special engine boost. This one's going to give you a 20% boost rather than an 8%. It only lasts half the time though, at 60 seconds versus the 120 seconds on the tech tree ships. And we still retain that nice fast cooldown heal, allowing us to recover some HP relatively quickly. Not that you want to be doing any tanking, it is still a light cruiser after all. But I really like this ship a lot more than the tech tree ones. I don't know if it's necessarily better, but I like the design of it a lot more. There is massive risk in taking your light cruiser within 9.5 kilometers of the enemy ships. We can get to these radar rocks on the other side or around caps and still not be in range to actually hit the enemy ships that are on the other side of the caps radar rocks. And I think that's really important here. You have to risk your ship to really get a lot of damage out of these airstrikes and maximize that DPM. Or the enemy team has to push into you, which they will do for now because people don't know about this ship. You know, that's one of the benefits of playing these ships early, of course. People don't understand what they're pushing into. Once people know, I think most people will stay outside of that 9.5 kilometers of range. These are still amazing airstrikes, all right? They still have that 5,800 alpha damage. They still have 34 millimeters of pen, the same fire chance as well, to go along with that insanely fast reload. One thing to note, though, the box is slightly bigger, okay? And that might sound like a good thing, but you still have the same number of bombs. So that means the bombs are a little more spread out. You're going to have a little bit less consistency of those bombs within that drop reticle. Although you're gaining consistency through the reload. Even faster than battleship reload. It's absolutely wild. So let's talk about how you can get this ship first of all. I don't really care too much to go over the early access stuff when it comes to the tech tree ships. We know what early access is like. But for premiums, well, we got to talk about it a little bit more. This ship will be available in random bundles. So each bundle costing 1,500 doubloons, and there's 70 random bundles total. That means you're gambling for this ship, unfortunately. No mention of if this ship will be available later on. No idea. So unfortunately, if you want this one, you will have to gamble for it. Really disappointing that. I really do wish Wargaming wouldn't do this kind of thing, or if they do, at least offer a direct money purchase for these premium ships. I'm always against these just slimy mechanics, in my opinion, trying to get people to think they're gonna get the ship early on. I'll be lucky, right? You'll see the posts on Reddit, you'll see the posts on YouTube, whatever social media, on Discord. Your buddy will get it first drop and you'll go and try it. And of course, what do you get? It's gonna be towards the end, right? That won't be everyone, but just know that people who are posting about getting this ship are probably the people that got it early on. The people who didn't and spent a bunch of money and maybe didn't even get it probably aren't posting. Just something to consider as far as the price on this ship. Very expensive. Compared to the Zeven Provincien, which is the dockyard ship. I was going to say battle pass. Dockyard ship from so long ago. I mean, dockyards are basically battle pass, let's be honest. But that ship had a fast reload for its time. 65-second base reload on those airstrikes. This one's base is at 38. It also has a slightly better drop pattern as far as the number of bombs and the reticle size. I guess a few less bombs, but much tighter reticle. It also could store up to 3 charges, whereas this one only gets 2. And that one had 13 kilometers of range. So the weakness here is going to be the range. Against your own tier, there are going to be situations where you can push up and make use of it. You can push aggressively and then set up in your smoke screen and make use of these airstrikes. Our smoke fire is something like 4.5, so I got to be very careful here. especially with our smoke running out here. This close to a battleship, we're going to see the armor tested a little bit here as a light cruiser. We have a reasonable amount of HP, and with this improved engine boost, I'm hoping our maneuverability can help us out a little bit. But we're greedy for the DPM on these airstrikes. So I'll show you the build later. We will be taking the airstrike modification, not propulsion mod. So even with our engine boost, we're actually not that maneuverable at all. That is a key weak point here. No armor sometimes is the best armor. So this poor Hyuga is just going to overpen us. He's still going to do good damage. Can I even say that with a straight face? You know, it's like 5,000 to 7,000 damage. Is that good? Maybe. I don't know. I shouldn't be getting away with this, I suppose. Look at that dispersion, by the way. It is just cruiser dispersion. Maybe that's just unlock dispersion. I don't know what was going on there, but typically your dispersion is going to look a little bit better than that. Speaking of those main guns, yes, I think we have standard Dutch guns. We don't actually have the German 128s here. And that's a benefit and a downside. The benefit here being you do have higher HE DPM than the Jaarsveld. I'm bad at pronunciating. I'm sorry pronouncing things. I do apologize, all right? But with these Dutch ships, it's hard, man. But the HE DPM on the Tech Tree Tier 8 is quite a bit lower. The AP DPM is quite a bit higher on the Tech Tree Tier 8 that's coming. We'll take a look at that one in a little bit. There's so many new ships to go over here. So we're doing the premium, at least right now. But crucially, you don't have that shell velocity. So I'm going to notice, I noticed a lot while playing the ship, that the guns were much harder to lead. You also don't have the HE pen. So this ship only has 20 millimeters of HE pen instead of that 32 like we see on those Tech Tree ships. So some trade-offs there, I suppose. But the HE pressure can be a little bit better. Your fire chance is certainly higher, as well as your fires per minute. So it's going to be a better fire starter with these guns, and they are 360 degrees. The Tier 10 only had like 2 turrets that were 360 degrees. The Tier 9 didn't have any, actually. Little spoilers. We'll take a look at those in a bit, don't you worry. But the Tech Tree Tier 8 also gets fully 360 degree turrets, allowing you to really not worry about where your guns are pointing. I think that's really convenient and makes this ship a little bit easier to play. And you're going to need that because I think this one is going to be much harder to play. And because of that, I like it. There's a massive risk reward here. It's not like I have massive range on these airstrikes to hit a lot of people at very easy islands to get to. Tons of bomb damage, as you can tell from that game. You'll notice that there's going to be games where you get up-tiered into Tier 10 games, and you're going to struggle. It's not going to be easy against those higher tier ships. I guess in this one we're against Tier 9s, I suppose. But people are going to play passive. You'll notice that that Baltimore is just outside of our range, and I'm going to greed a little bit for it. But there's an Iowa here, there's Alabama, North Carolina, ships that I would love to airstrike, but I just do not have the range for it when sitting behind this very common radar rock. I think that's the key here, is that this ship does have a smoke, it does have an engine boost that's better, but you are trading off the consistency of that range. I should also mention we have 4 heals here. The heals will be nerfed, or at least you'll have 1 less. That is 1 nerf that is coming to these new ships. Utrecht is getting buffed on its HE, or its main gun reload, and the Vrijheid here is getting a nerf to its healing. Very interesting that we're still doing a bunch of, well, not a bunch, but some buffs and nerfs to these ships that have not been tested, just going live into the game that you can use money to buy without being tested. It's nowhere near as bad as the Libertad line gaining that insane acceleration and maneuverability, not being tested and just being put into the game. But still, the feedback I think was pretty clear on my side, Wargaming. Why are we just buffing or nerfing ships without testing them at all before we're selling them in early access? Even the Tech Tree ones, I mean, they're selling them for 2 months, right? Disappointing way to start 2025. That's just the economy and monetization of this game, let alone the balance here. This one to me feels a little bit more balanced because it doesn't have that range that allows it to freely use those airstrikes. I played a bunch more of all of these new Dutch light cruisers, and this one felt the most interesting to me. I mean, it's still just ridiculous power on those airstrikes. You see that Iowa taking massive damage and fires. But this one felt the most interesting because it was actually hard and difficult to figure out ways to actually be in range to use this airstrike. The other ones, you just kind of set up and you use them as people are playing close to caps. And if they're not playing close to caps, well then you're just winning that flank and winning that side. It's very simple in that regard. So I guess that's a good thing to know about going into this ship. I do think it will be much harder to play. So if you're interested in a premium ship as far as these Dutch light cruisers go, know that it does play a little bit differently and is more difficult to play. But it also feels a little bit more rewarding, in my opinion at least. Los Andes here, very powerful ship, as we know. Let's push up with him. Notice we don't have a hydro or a defensive fire. Yes, there are some weak points here, certainly. No hydro means that in our smoke, we can easily just die to torpedoes. Whenever you're smoked up, HE farming as a light cruiser, or anybody in a smoke, let's be honest, destroyers love to torp at smoke screens. I love to do it. Any of you who've played a torp boat, you know how juicy it is. Someone smokes up and starts to farm out of it. You're just getting ready for that dev strike, right? So not having a hydro is a big weak point here. Also, no defensive fire. Typically, not too bad in some of these Dutch ships, but our AA was surprisingly weak, actually, in the carrier games that I ran into. I found myself not really able to shoot down all that many planes, and I was surprised by that. So you got to be a little bit careful here. A lot of those Dutch light cruisers, actually, the tier 8 and tier 9 especially, even the tier 10 at times, felt like it really didn't shoot down a lot of planes. So given that you want to play around islands with these ships, yes, this one has a smoke screen, but you're not always going to have that available like we don't right now. You do want to play around islands, and that means you need very powerful AA to camp on islands if there's a carrier in the game. Your AA won't shoot through rocks. It gives the carrier great approach angles to not take any damage, and you're very stationary on an island, so it means you'll likely take a lot more damage. So we got to be a little bit careful of that the AA is not as powerful as we might see on the heavy cruisers, because the heavy cruisers do get access to that defensive fire. But this one is fun, I gotta say. I really did enjoy the challenge of this ship, and I enjoyed the extra fire chance on this ship. It felt like I was landing quite a bit more fires from the main guns, and even though we don't have that 32 mil pen, the extra HE DPM felt like it was pretty useful against ships like destroyers, for example. Although I did find myself missing that shell velocity. Yes, the DPM is quite low on the tech tree ships, and the pen is very nice, but really the big deal on those guns is that the shell velocity is so powerful. It makes it very comfortable to use the ship, lead the targets, and land a lot of shells. Even if they don't do as much damage per shell, you're still getting full pens with those 32mm pen HE shells. This one will not do that. You'll also notice we have only 8 guns here. The reload's relatively quick, but 8 guns means when that dispersion wants to troll you, it can be a little bit awkward. And yes, airstrikes or aircraft coming in from the enemy carrier. His strikes, we do manage to avoid them, but I wasn't shooting down that many planes. We do have a lot of plane damage, so it's possible my teammates are getting a lot of the plane kills. Maybe that's it. Maybe I haven't actually been lucky enough to strike the final blow on some of those aircraft, but it still felt like it wasn't enough to fully play super aggressive into a carrier game when that carrier wants to take you out. Your main gun range is still quite good on this ship with these 120mm guns, so you're still able to farm reasonably well out of your smoke. It just means you're not getting the full value out of the ship because you're likely not in range with these airstrikes. It's a little bit awkward to play in that regard. You don't have insane HE DPM for your tier. It's okay, but not massive, and you certainly can use it as a smoked up HE farmer, but the full value of these ships with airstrikes, much like ships with torpedoes that are, of reasonable range to use, not just YOLO torps, typically you do need to be getting value out of all of your main armaments, not just one of them, to have really good games. And certainly that is the case here with this ship. We do want to be in range of those airstrikes to get the most value out of it, the most damage, as well as the most pressure on the enemy team. This ship will not farm down battleships particularly quickly with the main guns here. The damage just isn't there for it, and certainly not the pen. You're going to land fires. I think maybe that's the idea with this one, is you're not having the full pens as much, but you have higher fire chance. So when you do manage to land the airstrikes on someone, you can smoke up and HE farm them to get the permanent fires. Something like that can be quite useful. And that's where you're going to get decent damage. You know, we're at okay damage. This is a tier 8 cruiser, remember? So over 100k feels reasonably strong, I suppose. And we do have healing at tier 8. That is something that is a big deal. Not every cruiser has a heal at these tiers. Surprisingly, a lot more of them do these days. Not really all that surprising, given how the matchmaker goes for poor mid-tier cruisers, especially light cruisers. It's tough out there playing some of the older ones that don't have healing. It's such a valuable asset that I'll show off later in this video. Yeah, our last game did not start off very well, yet we managed to bring it back on lower HP, we'll say. 140,000 damage. You can see how that damage just ramps up as soon as people get within range with these airstrikes. Something else you can do with the tech tree light cruisers is you can spot for yourself in open water and still use your airstrikes. It's a bit like stealth torping, right? Where you want to be able to spot your target and have your torps reach out past your detection range. This ship has a very tiny window for that. If people are pushing into you and you're kiting, you can make it work, but it is quite difficult. So pushing out here, I mean, this game is over. This one wasn't particularly close, right? A lot of blowout games these days. So to try and get a little bit more damage here at the end, decide to push out, to try and get in range of this Los Andes, and then smoke up. So hoping for that light cruiser armor, giving us overpens only against our ship, hopefully. And Los Andes looks like he's turning into our airstrike there. Unfortunately, he does go down before he gets in it, but very difficult to lead a Los Andes with these airstrikes, man. It's much easier to lead the old ships like a North Carolina or an Iowa in this game, for example, than some of those new ones. Perhaps I overstated how powerful these things are. I think they're going to just be so unfun to fight. I guess that's really my conclusion after playing these ships for a little bit more now this week. They're just going to be so unfun to fight against. Maybe not this one in particular because the range is so short. You know the guy who's using this one is risking a lot or playing incredibly well positionally to get in range to actually use the airstrikes on this one. But for the tech tree ones, it just feels like it's going to be so unfun to fight these ships with such fast reloading airstrikes with such long range. It's just going to be so miserable to fight against it. And they do really high damage as well. That's the other thing, is I think they're relatively strong. But for the average player, a light cruiser is often just going to explode. A light cruiser is often just not going to do very much damage because it's hard to get in positions where it's relatively easy to farm someone without taking a ton of damage these days. I do recognize that. I have to recognize that it's not going to be everyone playing these light cruisers that's just going to smash you. Like when you see a Colbert, not everyone's going to smash you like John the Ruthless would. I keep bringing him up. You should go watch him. Go look up John the Ruthless, YouTube and Twitch, especially Twitch. Very, very good light cruiser player. But he's a great example of a ship that does take a lot of damage when you play it incorrectly. Oh my goodness, what was that? Yes, we'll have to look at the armor after this game, but we managed to live. These light cruisers are squishy, man. When you're angled especially, it's kind of sad. When you're angled, you take more damage than when you're broadside. When you're broadside, you often will just eat overpens because battleship shells will pass right through you before they arm. And when you're angled, that is not necessarily the case. The Citadel on this ship actually has only 30 millimeter of deck armor, or the top of the Citadel is only 30 millimeters. So in Ohio, from 18 kilometers, yes, will overmatch and overmatch your Citadel. So that is overmatched Citadels right there, even though we were fully angled. Heals come back quickly though on this ship, and the smokes do help us survive. So that is the value here of this ship. You're risking more than the tech tree ships to get in range with your airstrikes, but you have more tools to help you stay alive. And at least that's the way it seems to me. But I just don't want to fight these ships, man. I don't want this kind of ship in the game, I guess, is what it comes down to. So I'm not too happy about that, I guess. I don't want more ships to prevent me from pushing up in my ships. I would rather the game be a little bit less passive. We're seeing some people push here, but you notice how a lot of them are in the Pan-American battleships. Those ships are crazy, but they kind of have to be crazy to push in, right? Like they have to be that insanely tanky to actually be able to push in without instantly dying. You notice how people who play older ships or more standard ships are often a little bit further back. They're incentivized to do that. Certainly, it's a lot harder to survive in, say, a North Carolina pushing in like that than in Ipiranga. So you don't see that quite as often, I guess. It's a tough thing. I do recognize it's a tough thing for wargaming to balance out. We want people to push in, but we don't want ships to feel like the AI, the secondary AI, is the one killing us. We'd rather fight against an actual player, I suppose. Notice here the shell velocity, 12 kilometers. I was fairly easily able to hit destroyers at 12 kilometers with the tech tree ships. Those German 128mm guns have very, very nice shell velocity. And it was very easy, or not easy, but relatively easy to hit destroyers at these ranges. Very, very difficult with this one here. Patience, waiting our time. You notice how the enemy team has kited to their spawn on our C flank, so we reposition. We don't push the enemy spawn, guys, right? That would be pretty obvious after eating almost all of our HP in one salvo. I don't think many people would continue to push after that, but still, the point remains, we don't want to push our spawn. Here, dealing with an Anhalt, we don't have the HE pen, so we're going to just shatter on him. He has a smaller superstructure as well, so perhaps that's a downside as well of playing at tier 8. Sometimes you can fight against ships with very small superstructures and a lot of armor. It's kind of that lower tier battleship armor scheme, where at higher tiers, there's some pretty massive superstructures that you can farm, even if you don't full pen their upper belt or deck armor, for example. Here we're getting some fires, though. Fire chance, see? It's not too bad. The 360 turrets are really nice for repositioning. Since our Vermont is almost dead, probably it would be a good idea to smoke up in this case. We do have 2 heals left. I was really trying while playing this ship to not use all 4 heals because, well, I don't think we're definitely not gonna have that once this ship fully releases. So think of this as like I have 1 heal remaining, I suppose. Not that we have a lot of HP anyway. I was going to use the propulsion mod, or sorry, the engine boost here to try and speed juke the Azumo, and I was thinking I would accelerate past the Azumo's shells. And even with that activation of the speed boost, he still overled us. So yeah, the acceleration on these ships is very, very bad. I know I'm not really building for it. I'm greeding out the extra airstrike reload, but it is something to consider. These ships have very little armor. They can take a lot of damage, as we saw, and their maneuverability is quite bad. So compared to some other light cruisers, it will take a lot more damage from enemy battleships, certainly, as well as enemy cruisers too. You're just not as maneuverable. That's something that does help keep those light cruisers alive a lot of the time. So it'll feel a little bit different. It maybe feels like this line is really just intended to run up to an island and then drop airstrike over it, and then wait for enemy ships to be in range of your main guns as well, firing over or around islands. But less of the aggressive light cruiser play, maybe some open watering here and there, or using certain island cover to block off angles rather than just block off all line of sight and then farming over it. Like here, for example, if we wanted to shoot at this Yoshino and the enemy ships, let's say they had the control of sea cap, right? Well, we could get to this island and prevent them from firing at us while also shooting at this Yoshino. Here, we're getting behind the island enough that we're going to be undetected, which is a smarter way to play. But you can play light cruisers like that as well, cutting off lines of fire so only certain people can shoot at you. These ones will still take a ton of damage in those scenarios. I'm a little conflicted, as you can tell. I am a little conflicted on these new ships. I don't know if they're necessarily going to be overpowered. I think the Utrecht is on pace to be a very, very strong ship that I don't personally want to fight against. Certainly the tier 9 also seems not too bad. It's very interesting. We often will see the tier 8 and 9 be quite a bit less powerful than the tier 10. I wonder why. But we do see that from time to time. And with this line, it seems like the tier 9 is pretty solid as well, actually. We'll take a look at that one later this week. And it's really the tier 8 where we see a bit of a weak point. The tier 8 gets 11-kilometer airstrike range, the tech tree one, that is. So not 13 and a half or 14 like the tier 9 and 10. So I guess maybe if the range was just nerfed on all of these. The Vrijheid here, I like that this ship has quite low range. I'm not actually able to airstrike everyone once I get close to a cap and sit behind an island. I still have to play more aggressive or find the right opportunity. But that does make this ship quite a bit harder to play and probably less good on average compared to the tech tree versions, I guess. So it's not an overpowered premium. That's some positive news. Ohio here pushing in as one of the last remaining ships. And just look at how close we actually have to get to him. Just barely able to drop the strikes before we get spotted. Fortunately, he's not looking at us, but you will have to play very sneakily to actually get value out of this ship. And he turns in just enough to avoid. I wasn't thinking he had room there against that island, so I should have led a little bit differently. It will take a lot of work to learn the lead of these airstrikes. Did I mention it when I was talking about the airstrikes earlier? I hope I did, but it's like 11 and a half seconds for this drop. So they don't have the parachutes by the looks of things. It's much like the Tromp in that way. So a little bit easier to lead in that regard, less time, but you got to get so close, man. That's going to be hard. And the other problem with this ship, of course, is going to be the cost. If you're unlucky, you probably aren't going to be lucky, let's be honest. I'm sorry, but that's just how it goes. Certainly relative to what you'll see posts on social media about people getting it very early. This ship will be expensive in those loot boxes, man. Gambling for this one, 1 in 70 bundles, 1,500 doubloons each. It will not be cheap to get this one, and it will be hard to play. I think it's very interesting, though. I wish the rest of the line was more like this one. Is that crazy? It would probably be a worse line, I suppose. It'd be harder light cruisers to play. But there'd be more risk involved for these airstrikes, man. The airstrikes are powerful. This reload is crazy on an airstrike. It's absolutely wild. And I know it's the tier 10, but 14 kilometers of range and still a 30-second reload. I mean, the tier 8, I guess, has like a 10-second reload worse than the premium tier 8, and he still gets 11 kilometers of range. I don't know. It just is. It screams a ship that's going to be so unfun to fight. It's going to be so miserable to fight these things. Maybe not this premium in particular, but just because it's going to have to risk so much to get that damage across. Here's the build that I was running. Can't quite go to a full 21 pointer here with these CC access before they release. So can't quite do a full build here. So can't run things like heavy HE, for example, but running Grease the Gears felt pretty good. Since the turn time is 13 seconds, you can start to outturn them, actually. Fortunately, we do have the 360 degree turrets, so that's not too bad to deal with. But 14.1 kilometer firing range, and it's tough to lead those shells at that longer range. The tech tree here has 15.9 and better shell velocity to go along top. So easier to use the tech tree ones. Maybe that's a good thing that the tech tree ones are easier or better, in my opinion. This one is unique though, and I find that fun. The challenge certainly was quite fun. You'll only get a maximum of 4 heals, keep in mind. That is a nerf that is coming to this ship. Sorry, 3 heals. Did I say 4? Sorry, it's getting a little late, I guess. I'm getting a little tired today. My apologies, my apologies. 3 heals max, 2 heals base. I am running Superintendent here, as we can see. The buffed up engine boost is really nice, 20%, but it's still sluggish. These ships are sluggish. They do lack armor. They will take a lot of damage when they get caught out, so that is something to be concerned about with light cruisers. Light cruisers are not easy to play in this game. Fortunately, this one does get a smoke as well. It is a unique ship, but it will be very, very expensive. Let's take a look at that armor for a second. Yes, 16 mil everywhere. So against that Tuga, we just ate overpens. That's basically all that happened. We do have enough armor here to bounce some battleship AP into our Citadel, at least at closer ranges. But as soon as the range gets a little further, well, that plunging fire becomes a bit of a problem. Notice our Citadel here is waterline, so that's pretty nice. But it also has that weird little step up. I'm very disappointed, I gotta say, in Wargaming's modeling of this Citadel. It is so hard to see. For example, I wish it was more like the Yamato hull where, yes, there is like a stepped up portion here that's in a bit of a weird angle, but we can actually see it, right? Like they highlight it. I wonder if that's because, like, you see this angle here, right? It's stepped up towards the middle and lower a little bit on the sides. Maybe that's just because these armor values are all different and that's the only reason we see it. But it does mean these Dutch cruisers, it's just so hard to tell. I think it does step up, right? Right, it steps up a little bit. It's so hard to see though. Look at that, man. It's got a small step up in the middle, but it doesn't really matter because, well, that Ohio hit our 30 mil Citadel armor here, the deck armor of the Citadel. Well, I mean, he first hit us up here, which, you know, that's really not going to do anything to Ohio shells. I nearly died insta, man. That's crazy. You know, I only survived because I took Survivability Expert, which we had before, and I had the HP flag. Without that HP flag, I think I'd die. Yeah, I was way less than 1500 HP. That's crazy. Saved by the new flag. There it is. I'm very happy detonations are gone, by the way, but that flag is quite useful. At least in this case, it certainly helped me to stay alive. Very interesting ship here, the Vrijheid. I like this one a lot. It is not as powerful as the tech tree ones, or at least not as easy to use, I suppose would be the right way to go about things. It's going to be very expensive. Not a fan of early access, but I'm even less of a fan of gambling for these premium ships. Without really any way to buy it outright, I guess the argument would be the buy it outright price is there. It's just all 70 bundles, which is going to be very expensive, of course. Perhaps it'll come back down the line, but they have not mentioned that at all, at least not in the documentation that I can see here. So that's unfortunate to see as well. But let me know what you think of this ship and these new Dutch light cruisers in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.